Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir. This is your digital classroom and my name is Sudhir. Today we are going to be taking a look and study comprehensively the first chapter from Echoes, and this is the textbook that's part of the ISC class 11 and 12 English syllabus. And this story is written by Somerset Maugham. He happens to be my father's favorite author. So that meant that as a child I was exposed to a large number of Somerset Maugham stories. This one, Sal-va-tor, is set in Italy and it's a very different kind of a story. There is no drama in that sense. There is no twist in the tale. There is nothing in the story that takes you by surprise as one would normally expect. But yet the story manages to hold your interest. And that's what Somerset Maugham reveals right at the end, the reason why he wrote the story in the first place. So the story actually leaves you with the feel-good factor. You feel good at the end of the story, and that's essentially the tone, the narrative, and the essence of this beautiful story set in Italy. So we'll go through the entire story, line by line, word by word explanation, as you always get here on Study with Sudhir. And I hope you will enjoy it along with me. I wonder if I can do it. Now this is a line which Somerset Maugham is saying directly to you. And he's actually wondering if he can do it. What is he talking about? We don't know, because after that he immediately delves into the story. But this is what is known as an authorial intrusion. An intrusion by the author telling something to the reader right in the first sentence, and in this case expressing a doubt, a concern whether he can really do it. What is he talking about? We'll come to know in the last paragraph of this story. Okay, I knew Salvatore first when he was a boy of 15. So this is a story of a boy called Salvatore, and this story is almost his biography from the age of 15 till he becomes a young man and a father of 2 boys. With a pleasant face, and look at now the description of the boy. With a pleasant face, a laughing mouth and carefree eyes. I don't think I have ever read an expression like a laughing mouth. You have heard of the laughing Buddha, but a laughing mouth. So basically what he wanted to convey, that here was a boy of 15, Salvatore, who was given to kind of enjoy himself and was an extremely pleasant kind of a person. He used to spend the morning lying about the beach with next to nothing on, and his brown body was as thin as a rail. Please mark all these physical descriptions that Somerset Maugham has given about Salvatore. He was full of grace. He was in and out of the sea all the time, swimming with the clumsy, effortless stroke common to fisher boys. So he is the son of a fisherman, and he would play with many other fisher boys. And look at, it's almost like an oxymoron. It's clumsy, yet the effortless manner in which he would have his strokes out there in the sea while he would be swimming. When you use the word effortless, it almost kind of conveys a sense of grace while swimming. So while he was a boy full of grace, he says, while it seemed effortless, it seemed to come naturally to him, yet it was a little clumsy, perhaps because he was only 15 years old. So it's a bit of an oxymoron, clumsy and effortless being used next to each other. Scrambling up the jagged rocks on his hard feet. Jagged essentially means rocks which have their rough, sharp edges protruding. On his hard feet again kind of conveying a very hard life, almost, if you ever go to a fishing village, you will realize there is a sense of roughness which is associated with the fisher folk, and that's one reason. I remember the first time I had gone, and this was on the Andhra coast somewhere in Kakinada. I was kind of taken aback by the kind of language they use, the kind of Telugu they spoke, which seemed to be a little bit on the rough side. The fisher folk, not the other people who stayed in the city and other villages, and that's because they used to kind of face the elements every day. So that kind of reflected in their body language, which again seemed to be a little aggressive, in their language, which seemed to be a little rough. At least for other people it would seem a little rough. For them, obviously, that was the manner in which they always spoke. So here also he uses the word hard feet. For except on Sundays, he never wore shoes. We assume that's because he would be going to the church on Sundays. He would throw himself into the deep water with a cry of delight. His father was a fisherman who owned his own little vineyard. So along with being a fisherman, he also owned a vineyard. And Salvatore acted as a nursemaid. Nursemaid is someone who looks after younger children, basically almost taking care of all their needs. He shouted to them to come inshore when they ventured out too far and made them dress when it was time to climb the hot vine-clad hill for the frugal midday meal. So lunch was obviously very meager. Frugal means something which is very little. But boys in those southern parts grow apace, and in a little while he was madly in love with a pretty girl who lived on the Grand Marina. Apace essentially means grow quickly. She had eyes like forest pools and held herself like a daughter of the Caesars. It's almost as though she had some kind of royal grace about her. And look at again the description, eyes like forest pools, so conveying a sense of beauty. And that's the girl that Salvatore had fallen in love with. They were affianced, but they could not marry till Salvatore had done his military service, which means that they were engaged to each other, but they could not marry till Salvatore had completed his stint in the military. And when he left the island, which he had never left in his life before, to become a sailor in the navy of King Victor Emmanuel, he wept like a child. Now, King Victor was the king of Italy. It was hard for one who had never been less free than the birds to be at the beck and call of others. So look at the kind of contrast that is being built up. That here was a boy who had never left that particular place. So there was a sense of a comfort zone that he had in that particular space. And now he had to go out of his comfort zone into an unknown kind of territory. Point number 2, here he was like a free bird to do whatever he felt like doing. But there in the army, he would have to be at the beck and call of his superior officers. It was harder still to live in a battleship with strangers instead of in a little white cottage among the vines. So look at the reasons which Somerset Maugham is giving why he would find that life in the military far more tough than the life that he is leading right now around his home. And when he was assured to walk in noisy, friendless cities with streets so crowded that he was frightened to cross them. So the cities would be both noisy, but there he would have absolutely no friends. When he had been used to silent paths and the mountains and the sea. So here he was used to being in the lap of nature. I suppose it had never struck him that Ischia, which he looked at every evening, it was like a fairy island in the sunset. So he kind of describing the beauty to the reader, to see what the weather would be like the next day. Or Vesuvius, pearly in the dawn, had anything to do with him at all. But when he ceased to have them before his eyes, he realized in some dim fashion that they were as much part of him as his hands and his feet. So the reasons why he would almost be like a fish out of water in the city while working in the military. He was dreadfully homesick, but it was the hardest of all to be parted from the girl he loved with all his passionate young heart. So the young man deeply in love with this girl whose eyes were like forest pool, and obviously finding all the other reasons why he would not be very comfortable living in the city, working in the army. He wrote to her in his childlike handwriting, long, ill-spelled letters. So obviously his spelling's not really very perfect, in which he told her how constantly he thought of her and how much he longed to be back. So the expression, the emotions, the sentiments are there, but obviously his handwriting is childlike and his spellings are not perfect. So Somerset Maugham almost taking a dig, a very gentle kind of a dig at Salvatore, or perhaps his lack of good education, or perhaps the fact that he was not very good as a student. He was sent here and there to Spezia, to Venice, to Bari, and finally to China. So he was sent all over the world. Here he fell ill of some mysterious ailment that kept him in hospital for months. He bore it with the mute and uncomprehending patience of a dog. you know. So look at the kind of comparisons that Somerset Maugham is making. Nothing uncharitable about it, but basically he's making it easy for the reader to understand what he wants to convey about Salvatore. Because a dog is supposed to be extremely patient, you know, bearing it with a lot of, you know, fortitude, and basically not having a more uncomplaining kind of a nature. When he learned that it was a form of rheumatism that made him unfit for further service, his heart exulted. Now, it's an interesting kind of a reaction. Now, whenever any one of us told that you are suffering from this major disease, you would actually, you know, your heart would sink, you would feel extremely despondent, very sad, very unhappy. But here, his heart actually exulted. Rheumatism is essentially an inflammation in the joints. His heart exulted, became very happy. Why? For he could now go home. And he did not bother. In fact, he scarcely listened when the doctors told him that he would never again be quite well. So they were actually giving a very dire prognosis of what his condition of rheumatism was, the inflammation in the joints that he would suffer from almost throughout his life. But he did not bother about it. In fact, he was feeling more happy that this would actually give him the perfect excuse to leave the army and go back to his land, back home. What did he care when he was going back to the little island he loved so much and the girl who was waiting for him? Mark this line because this is important. When he got into the rowing boat that met the steamer from Naples and was rowed ashore, he saw his father and mother standing on the jetty and his two brothers, big boys now, and he waved to them. His eyes searched among the crowd that waited there because he was looking for the girl as well. He expected that she would have also come to receive him. He could not see her. There was a great deal of kissing when he jumped up the steps, and they all, emotional creatures, cried a little when they exchanged their greetings because they are feeling bad that he had to leave the military in such circumstances because of his medical ailment, because of these kind of medical reasons. He asked where the girl was. His mother told him that she did not know. They had not seen her for 2 or 3 weeks. So in the evening, when the moon was shining over the placid sea and the lights of Naples twinkled in the distance, he walked down to the Grand Marina to her house. She was sitting on the doorstep with her mother. He was a little shy because he had not seen her for so long. He asked her if she had not received the letter that he had written to her to say that he was coming home. So, formal inquiries being made by Salvatore to the girl. Please note that the girl is not named. Okay. For whatever reason, Somerset Maugham decides that he will not name the girl. It's a girl that Salvatore was in love with, but Somerset Maugham decides not to name the girl. And I will talk about it a little later in the story. He asked her if he had not received the letter that he had sent her to tell that he was coming home. Yes, they had received the letter and they had been told by another of the island boys that he was ill. So, the girl and her family was completely aware, was fully aware of the reason why he had quit the army and had come home. Yes, that was why he was back. Was it not a piece of luck? Oh, but they had heard that he would never be quite well again. So, while on one hand, they are feeling okay, happy about the fact that that allowed him to come back home, but also, unlike Salvatore, almost everyone is concerned about the fact that this is going to mean that for the rest of his life, he is not going to be 100% healthy and well. The doctor talked a lot of nonsense, but he knew very well that now he was home again, he would recover. They were silent for a little and then the mother nudged the girl. She did not try to soften the blow. She told him straight out with the blunt directness of her race that she could not marry a man who would never be strong enough to work like a man. These are important sentences, please mark them, that the reason why this girl rejects Salvatore, and perhaps that's the reason Somerset Maugham decides not to name the girl, because she rejects the man. So, she is not part of Salvatore's life story, because here Somerset Maugham is telling us about Salvatore's story. So, the fact that her part in his life till then, even though they were engaged to be married, ends at that point in time. Perhaps that's the reason Somerset Maugham decides not to name this character. She tells him that she could not marry a man who could never be 100% healthy and who could never work like a man. So the emphasis on masculinity, emphasis on the fact that a man had to be hardworking and to be able to kind of do the things that a man is expected to do. The Italian notion of masculinity and manhood. They had made up their minds, her mother and father and she and her father would never give consent. So there was parental opposition, as well as the girl had this reason, or at least that's what she articulated, that she could never marry a man who could never work like a man. When Salvatore went home, he found that they all knew, his family members already knew about why the girl had refused to marry him. The girl's father had been to tell them what they had decided, but they had lacked the courage to tell him themselves. He wept on his mother's bosom. He was terribly unhappy, but he did not blame the girl. Point number 1. Now look at the goodness of Salvatore, that even though he has been rejected, he has been in a sense humiliated, because if the girl was in love with him, did it really make a difference that he had fallen ill and therefore he would never be the same old Salvatore? Was it a good enough reason for the girl now to change her mind and decide that she will not marry him? Yet Salvatore does not blame the girl for the decision that she has taken as far as her marital future is concerned. A fisherman's life is hard and it needs strength and endurance. He knew very well that a girl could not afford to marry a man who might not be able to support her. His smile was very sad and his eyes had the look of a dog that had been beaten. So another instance where some aspect of Salvatore's personality is being compared by Somerset Maugham to that of a dog. So there is this dog theme that seems to run through this particular story. So and I'll tell you another reason. I mean, the fact that there is something about loyalty, whether loyalty towards his homeland, to the place where he has been kind of brought up, loyalty even to the girl he loved, loyalty to the lady he would eventually marry. There is something very fiercely dog-like quality about Salvatore. The feeling of being extremely faithful. So all these themes of, when Somerset Maugham is comparing him to a dog in perhaps not very flattering kind of way, he's also kind of giving us a sense of Salvatore's overall personality, where he also has the good qualities that dogs, canines usually have. His smile was very sad and his eyes had the look of a dog that has been beaten. But he did not complain and he never said a hard word of the girl he had loved so well. Dogs also have that thing, even though they are betrayed by human beings, sometimes they are beaten by human beings, they are dumped by human beings on the streets, but anytime any other human being will go and feed it something, it will immediately wag its tail and come back to it. There is something extremely trusting about a canine. It trusts human beings even though it may have had a bad experience here. But here also, very similarly, Salvatore does not say any harsh word about the girl he loved, even though she has dumped him in not so nice kind of a manner. Then a few months later, when he had settled down to the common round, working in his father's vineyard and fishing, his mother told him that there was a young woman in the village who was willing to marry him. Her name was Assunta. So now is introduced the other female character in this particular story. She's as ugly as the devil, he said. Now this is perhaps the only negative sentence that Salvatore has said in this entire story. She's as ugly as the devil, and at that point in time, perhaps that's because he has just gone by the physical appearance of Assunta, and that's what he believes, that she's not beautiful at all. And perhaps this was also because though a few months had passed, it was not very long ago that he was deeply in love for a long time with this beautiful girl whose eyes were like forest pools, right? So perhaps he had still not come over her, and therefore he felt any other girl would pale in comparison. And so is the case with Assunta. She was older than he, 24 or 25, and she had been engaged to a man who, while doing his military service, had been killed in Africa. So there you see there is also a contrast. Her fiance, Assunta's fiance, was someone who was killed while being on the battlefront, right? In contrast is Salvatore, who had been quite happy with his rheumatism and was happy to be sent out of the army back to his home. So there is a sense of contrast there. She had a little money of her own. Now that's a deciding factor, and that's going to be a deciding factor. And if Salvatore married her, she could buy him a boat of his own to go fishing, and they could take a vineyard that by happy chance happened at that moment to be without a tenant. So a vineyard and a boat, and he could be self-sufficient in that way, just like his father was. His mother told him that Assunta had seen him at the Festa. Festa is a religious kind of a festival in Italy and in that part of Europe, the Mediterranean, and had fallen in love with him. So Assunta had fallen in love. It was a case of love at first sight as far as Assunta was concerned. Salvatore smiled his sweet smile and said he would think about it. So obviously he's feeling a little flattered, though just a little while ago he had described her as ugly as the devil. But now his mother telling him that she had fallen in love with him seemed to kind of soften him a bit and change his opinion a bit. At least he says, I will think about it. On the following Sunday, dressed in the stiff black clothes in which he looked so much less well than in the ragged shirt and trousers of every day, he went up to the high mass at the parish church and placed himself so that he could have a good look at the young woman. When he came down again, he told his mother that he was willing. So he wears a shirt which is not really his best shirt, at least it does not flatter him too well, okay, in which he looked so much less well than in the ragged shirt that he normally wore. But he sees her, and now he has changed his opinion about her, perhaps because of two reasons. One, that he's flattered by the fact that the girl is in love with him. Number two, that she has money with which he could buy a boat, and they could also have a vineyard, and he could lead a happy, financially decent life. So those could be the two reasons why he decides to marry Assunta. Well, they were married and they settled down in a tiny whitewashed house in the middle of a handsome vineyard. You know, interesting that vineyard should be described as handsome. Obviously, it's a good looking vineyard. Salvatore was now a great big husky fellow, tall and broad, but still with that ingenious smile and those trusting eyes, kindly eyes that he had as a boy. He had the most beautiful manner. Ingenious essentially means simple. He had the most beautiful manners I have ever seen in my life. So it is Somerset Maugham kind of describing, it's almost like he's describing a friend who he has seen from childhood, at least from the age of 15. Assunta was a grim visage, grim as in serious, visage is the thing for face, synonym for face. So a serious looking, serious faced female with decided features, you know, with very set kind of facial expressions, features, and she looked old for her years. So he means that she looked older than she was, that more than 24 or 25. But she had a good heart and she was no fool. I used to be amused by the little smile of devotion that she gave her husband when he was being very masculine and masterful. She never ceased to be touched by his gentle sweetness, but she could not bear the girl who had thrown him over. So she's obviously, she does not like the mention of the thought of the previous fiance that Salvatore had. And notwithstanding Salvatore's smiling expostulations, you know, she had nothing, as in smiling and a kind of, you know, defense in a sense. She had nothing but harsh words for her. Presently, children were born to them. So now they have a family as well. It was a hard enough life. All through the fishing season towards evening, he set out on his boat with one of his brothers for the fishing grounds. It was a long pull of 6 or 7 miles and he spent the night catching the profitable cuttlefish. So that's the kind of life Salvatore is now leading as a married man and as a fisherman. Then there was a long row back again in order to sell the catch in time for it to go on the early boat to Naples. So that's the kind of business that he was indulging in, fishing in the night, come back early morning and put it on the boat in order to ensure that it goes to Naples for sale. At other times he was working in his vineyard from dawn till the heat drove him to rest, and then again when it was a trifle cooler, trifle as in little cooler, till dusk. Often his rheumatism prevented him from doing anything at all, and then he would lie about the beach smoking cigarettes with a pleasant word for everyone, notwithstanding the pain that racked his limbs. So he continues to have the inflammation in the joints that causes him much pain, at which point of time he just takes a rest, smokes a cigarette, and generally has nice things to say about the others who are having a good time at the sea, at the beach. The foreigners who came down to bathe and saw him there said that these Italian fishermen were lazy devils. So, you also realize that devil is a very normal way of speaking. Perhaps that's the way he also described Assunta the first instance. Okay, so that's how, because they were just lying. So appearances are often deceptive. The tourists who came there to bathe, the foreigners, did not have the foggiest of idea that here is a man who's actually extremely hardworking and is only taking a break because he's suffering from the illness. But they kind of jumped to the conclusion that these Italian fishermen were lazy devils. Similarly, it also is a throwback to the earlier instance where the devil word was used, where he described Assunta as ugly as the devil. So which is what the larger messaging is, that never go by appearances. Appearances are deceptive. Just as here we know that Salvatore is not a lazy devil, Assunta also we realize that she was actually a very nice lady, though had a very serious kind of an exterior, serious kind of a face, but she had a good heart. That's what Somerset Maugham says, and she obviously was deeply in love with her husband. Sometimes Salvatore used to bring his children down to give them a bath. They were both boys, and at this time the elder was 3 and the younger less than 2. They sprawled about at the water's edge, stark naked, and Salvatore, standing on a rock, would dip them in the water. The elder one bore it with a stoicism. I mean, he was quite okay with all this activity of being dipped inside the water. But the baby, the younger one, who was less than 2 years old, screamed lustily. Salvatore had enormous hands, rough, hard hands kind of stuff, with legs of mutton. Look at the way Somerset Maugham has kind of described Salvatore, almost as though he's just a piece of flesh. With legs of mutton, coarse and hard from constant toil. But when he bathed his children, holding them so tenderly, drying them with delicate care, upon my word, they were like flowers. So there is this very interesting contrast that Somerset Maugham is bringing to the reader, that while on one hand he had enormous hands, legs like mutton, because of all that constant toil, when he handled his children, he handled them as if they were delicate flowers. So it also shows what kind of a parent he is, what kind of a father he is. He would seat the naked baby on the palm of his hand and hold him up, laughing a little at his smallness, and his laugh was like the laughter of an angel. His eyes then were as candid as his child's. Basically the innocence still kind of resonates from Salvatore's personality. I started by saying now Somerset Maugham is going back to his opening sentence. And what was the opening sentence? I wonder if I can do it. I started by saying that I wondered if I could do it, and now I must tell you what it is that I have tried to do. I wanted to see whether I could hold your attention for a few pages while I drew for you the portrait of a man, just an ordinary fisherman who possessed nothing in the world except a quality which is the rarest, the most precious, and the loveliest anyone can have. Heaven only knows why he should strangely and unexpectedly have possessed it. All I know is that it shone in him with a radiance that, if it had not been unconscious and so humble, would have been to the common run of men hardly bearable. And in case you have not guessed what that quality is, I'll tell you: goodness, just goodness. So look at this absolutely beautiful language the tonality with which Somerset Maugham ends, and pays tribute to the quality of goodness that Salvatore has in him. And that's what he says, this entire story is about the man's essential goodness. And that's what he wants to pay tribute to. You know, he respects that tribute and he calls it the rarest, the most precious and the loveliest quality, virtue that any person can have. Okay. And he says that it's shown in him with a radiance. Okay. And that is what makes Salvatore so special, so different. So, basically it's a biographical kind of a sketch of Salvatore told in third person by Somerset Maugham. There may be people, there may be readers, I don't know how many of you would agree with me, who may feel a little disappointed. Arey kahani mein to koi twist hi nahi aaya, there is no twist in the end, it's just like a Suraj Barjatiya kind of a film, right? All a very feel good kind of a story. But that's what Somerset Maugham, even with this kind of a story which does not have any kind of a dramatic twist, he's able to hold your interest just talking about the goodness of an ordinary fisherman called Salvatore. Okay. So that is the main theme of the story, is the focus on the goodness of the man, and the author is directly communicating with the reader, and that's another important device that he has used, that he is talking directly to the reader. Okay, then there are a lot of comparisons which are used, wept like a child, thin as a rail, right in the first paragraph. Legs of mutton, enormous hands, they were like flowers, the comparison to dog. So a lot of similes have been used in order to make the story that much more sharp and focused. Okay. So with the first sentence he has been able to catch the reader's attention, because the reader all through will be thinking, what is it that he said in the first sentence? What is he wondering whether he can actually do or not do? So it also gives a slightly conversational kind of a tone between Somerset Maugham and readers like you and me, right? Then the other thing is about Salvatore's sense of responsibility. He's a very responsible father, he's a responsible husband, and in that sense, in love with his homeland, he loves the place around his homeland, and the fact that he's a hard-working guy. Those are the different aspects of Salvatore's personality that you must make note of. He used to act like a nursemaid for his younger brothers, and now as a parent he takes care of his two boys as well. The other aspect that I mentioned about being loyal and being faithful right at the beginning of this video lesson. So he remains faithful towards a girl he loves, and that's a very important aspect. He does not feel angry about the kind of decision, even though it goes against him, he does not feel angry about the decision that he has taken. Even while he is on his duty in the military, his thoughts are always occupied with the girl that he has left behind. Okay, so it essentially talks about the sincerity of his love. Then the other quality, you see that there isn't much of a difference between him as a child of 15 and when he grows to become a parent. He retains that quality of being a giver and being extremely generous with his time and the essential attitude of taking care of others despite all the hardships of life. So there is something extremely humble about him, because that's what it said also in the third last sentence, that if he had not been so unconscious and so humble, he is not very conscious about what he has to do, and he's also at the same time full of humility about the manner in which he goes about his different jobs. So that's essentially the gist of the story Salvatore. As I mentioned, the authorial intrusion right at the beginning of the story, which allows Somerset Maugham to be a part of the story through and through. He stays with the story. So you have Salvatore as a character, you have his parents, you have that girl he loved and he was engaged to, you have Assunta, the two boys, but then there is also Somerset Maugham. You can almost feel Somerset Maugham's presence because he is telling the story to you in third person. So you know that there is a person who knows Salvatore very well, and therefore you can trust Somerset Maugham with the facts when he is telling you this particular story. I hope you liked the story. I did. We will discuss, of course, the questions, etc. closer to the examinations, long time to come. But please go through the story again, mark all the keywords. Those will really come in handy when you are writing your answers, because as I always say, always quote from the story directly that makes your answer look that much better. Okay? Thank you very much for watching. All the best to you. We'll continue to do all the ISC English stories and poems from the two textbooks that you have both for class 11 and 12. So this is going to be an interesting journey with you right here on Study with Sudhir. So share, like, comment and subscribe to Study with Sudhir. Thank you very much.